have a company that's packaging Android and basically rebadges the thing and themes the whole environment based on the what you will find with Migo and WebOS and things like that. They tend to obscure the fact that it's an Android thing. They want it to look like their type of experience, their type of thing, and their type of device, which was made specifically for this operating system to work with the buttons, and there is insurance, there is guarantee, and everything else. So you now have lots of companies with very big names to compete with in this case with Apple. I suppose Sony is a very good brand that's for reliable hardware. So if people buy a tablet that's made by Sony, or they buy a console that's made by Sony, or a handheld console or something like that, or a phone made by Sony Ericsson, they will not view it as some kind of a Linux gadget, or something called like OpenMoko, or they will view it as this is the Sony device, or this is the Nokia device. Whatever it runs, it just runs. And Nokia's got a very strong brand in phones, for example. So if people are going to talk about Apple versus Nokia, they know Nokia has been a lot bigger than Apple in phones for a long time. So, this is kind of a nice carrier for Linux to enter under the banner not of Android and not the banner of Linux, but more of the banner of the companies that make these devices.
I'm very encouraged by, in particular, Sony and their early relationship with Linux or Android. A company like Sony has got the clout, has got the name within the mainstream end user, for want of a better word, to obviously push the concept of open source software, Android, to push that into the main. I'm trying to mention Sony as little as possible because I don't want to sound like a promoter of their products, because obviously I use a lot of their products and I'm very, very happy with them. But it is good, companies like Sony, which does to an extent have a name a bit like Apple in terms of being fashionable and trendy as much as you can in household electronic equipment. So I'm very encouraged by that particular relationship, especially with their new Xperia phone that's rumored to be released very shortly. So no, I think that's a good sign, and soon it'll become a case where Android, Linux, open source software isn't even thought of because it's just globally accepted and globally, massively used. And I think that day isn't too far away now. We already see examples of it everywhere. You're very hard pushed now to walk down the street and not find an example of Linux or open source software on something. Very, very hard pushed. So, and that's certainly a difference from 10 years ago. So yeah, I think the future is very bright. And I think whilst the desktop PC, may never be the year of the Linux desktop, I think the majority of users are now migrating away from the desktop as much because there's all sorts of mobile devices which give you the same access elsewhere.
You could put them on a desktop as well sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, for me personally, I could never get rid of my desktop. I like the traditional mouse, keyboard, and monitor, and nobody will ever convince me that a touchscreen keyboard is something I'm going to want to use, because I'll use it as a sufferance. But certainly, I like to be sat up straight. I like to have be positioned in a certain way, and I like the feel of a desktop keyboard. I feel like I'm being productive. Having said that, though, just very quickly, Roy, I was blogging the other day on my Android, which is quite really remarkable. I say that probably because it won't be remarkable for 99% of the people listening to this, but for me, I was a staunch denier of the viability of surfing on a touchscreen mobile phone about 2 years ago when I was commenting on Microsoft Watch. I've got very clunky hands, so I'm not particularly good with the touchscreen keyboards. And to be fair, it's difficult. It doesn't come naturally to me to use it, but I can blog and I can write articles on a little Android phone, no bigger than a packet of cigarettes, which just shows the power of of where we've got today with that Android. So I'm chuffed to bits. And whilst it's not ideal, certainly at a push, if I'm sitting at a train station waiting, often 20-30 minute delay, I can type in a quick article and still be productive on the go with a tiny little device that fits in my pocket. So that's very good for me.
I was just going to say something about brands. I was thinking about some brands associated with Linux, and one of them is IBM. Although the mainframes, they tend to market based on the ZOS, which is a proprietary one. But then you have Oracle, and Oracle is a funny one because Oracle is, as far as I know, puts Linux in like 80% of their deployments. Nobody talks about that. And they own a lot of, they have their own distro now, which is really just a rebrand of Red Hat with some tweaks. And despite the fact that they were trying to make this type of a clone of Red Hat has just been upgraded again, and it's really close to $50. And it's more of a psychological barrier for the company. I don't think they've hit $50 in a very, very long time. And it just shows you that those who sell servers and those who are actually very strongly in the business of Linux, they do exceptionally well. They carry on growing. They hire more people. Contrary to the belief, perhaps, that Linux is like going away because of Ubuntu or Android. There is this kind of concern because you see companies like Mandriva and Linspire, Xandros, Turbo Linux. These are the ones, by the way, who sold out to Microsoft. So usually you find out that those companies which kind of disappear, and of course Novell is being sold very soon, are those who decided to look for Microsoft, for Microsoft to help them sell Linux, and Microsoft wasn't so helpful at all, even without backlash from people. There was nothing to be found in having an alliance with Microsoft. One thing I'll just say about the Red Hat very quickly though is you don't really see them doing anything else now except for the server, which is a bit disappointing because a few years back they had this thing called, I think, the Global Desktop. Just around the time Vista was out, they were thinking about entering the desktop market, but eventually they withdrew. One of the issues they had was with codecs. And they were looking for ways to as they call it, license the codecs, and they had to speak to Microsoft too about that. I think this was one of the sticking points they had. And now, of course, we kind of go towards the point where we might have some codecs free of charge, an exceptionally good point, not just because of Ogvorbs, but because we have web video. And web video is now being moved to, at least will very soon move to WebM. Google is still working on just translating the whole of YouTube to a format that's going to be under Google's complete control, but also be open source and apparently without any patent issue either. So that can change quite a lot for Linux on a desktop. What you do find, and this was an issue kind of implicitly raised by Linus Torvalds in his interview, was that in the phones now we have Android to be proud of, and on the desktop, Ubuntu makes things a lot easier for a lot of distros, and I'm strongly kind of in favor of Ubuntu. I never really opposed it so much. I had some issues sometimes with the community, or the community being infiltrated by some very unpleasant people who pretend to be people inside Ubuntu, and all they do is just try to trash the community. And then there is the issue of what do you do about these people, or how do you deal with them? But I saw that Linus was extremely delighted in the conference about the fact that even outside of the server room, where Linux is exceptionally well known and extremely popular, he knows that things are going extremely well for the kernel. At least from his point of view, the kernel can also mean things like TomTom and TiVo, and which of course have lots of proprietary and rather malicious software at times with some of the features they implement, but they run on top of Linux, which is his bit of work, his package. So,
if I could just very, very quickly mention, Roy, and I say this quite a few times on the show. Yeah, I very much support Ubuntu. I always put my name behind it whenever I'm deploying Linux to a new user, especially ones that are just coming from Windows. I think I've always said Ubuntu can cater for the complete Linux newbie, and can also, there's a lot of die-hard, very experienced Linux users that use it as well. Fantastic distribution, no problems at all. But what I've noticed now, I'm running Sabian, I've run Wolvix, and a plethora of other distros over the years. But certainly nowadays, most distros, you get the functionality and the immediacy of a working desktop environment as a standard. I don't think a modern day distro would do very well at all, with a few exceptions of the ones that are aimed more towards the experienced users who go out of their way to make life difficult for themselves. I don't think you're going to find many distros that would survive if they weren't immediate plug in and play, ready to go, out of the box type affairs. I mean, certainly with Sabi and Sabai on I would challenge anybody to install that on the machine and tell me how that's any less user friendly or